Hey man, I'm Jusko from ProbMoney.com, and in this video we are going to look at some income numbers for the US. How many people are making 100K, 200K, 500K, a million plus, all that kind of thing, 75K, 50K on the other end, and then we'll also talk about some percentages, how much you need to make to be in the top 1, 5, 10, 20%, all of that kind of stuff. Before we do it, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not already, and if you have already, I thank you for doing so. So once a year, the Social Security Administration puts out a pretty interesting report and a big chart that shows how many people made how much money in certain ranges, and it goes all the way from people who made just gobs and gobs of money, like people who are CEOs, professional athletes, all that kind of stuff, all the way down to people who are, making part-time income who might be under 18 or whatever. So you have a huge range here. It's anyone whose income was reported to the federal government on a W-2. So we are going to dive into some of those numbers and see how many people are at these certain levels and what it takes for you to be at a certain percentage when you compare yourself to other people. Now, as I make this video, the latest numbers are for the year 2020, which you might think was a COVID year and threw things into disarray, but I looked back to the year 2019 and the numbers aren't a whole lot different. So I think these are still worthwhile to look at. So overall, when we look at all the people that earned wages that would have been reported to the federal government for 2020, we are looking at over 167 million people. Within all those 167 million, the average salary, the average wages for the year were something over $53,000. Now that is an average, and the way you get an average is you take all of the numbers, you add them together, and then you divide by the number of people. But what happens often with averages is you get skewed by the people at the very top who are making just ridiculous amounts of money, and it tends to push that number up. So we'll also look at the median number, which you would get by finding the absolute middle person. If you lined everyone up for the person who made the least to the person who made the most and found the middle person, that would be your median. And your median is more like around 34,000 something. So that is probably a better snapshot of where the sort of middle average person really is. But remember, again, these numbers are for anyone that made any wages during the year, even part-time people that made very little. So when we talk about that median, it's the median wages, but it's not necessarily what I would think of as the median income for a full-time worker. Now let's bust out those numbers further, going from the people who made just outrageous amounts of money to people who made still fairly outrageous amounts of money to somewhat more normal and then normal. We will start at the very top. 538 people made $50 million or more in the year 2020. This isn't, net worth. This is just for that 1 year. On their W-2, it said $50 million or more from their employers. So CEOs, maybe your top paid professional athletes, your hedge fund people, all those sorts of things are probably who fits in there. A pretty small number, but still 538. Now, look at 10 million or more. You've got 4,700 plus people that made $10 million or more just in that year. $1 million or more, now you're getting over 180,000 people in the United States that made $1 million or more. Now, 180,000 plus making 1 million or more seems like a pretty large amount, but if you really look at it compared to all the people that we're talking about here that had any wages for 2020, it is still less than 0.1% that made 1 million or more. So you're not just in the 1% at that level, you're in the 0.1%. Now, if we drop down a level to 500K, over 700,000 people made at least $500,000 in income. That still puts them far above just being in the top 1%. They are in the top half of 1%. If you are wondering what that number is that would get you into the top 1%, it is somewhere probably around $325,000 in income. We don't have the numbers to go exact to say what that 1% cutoff line is, but it is somewhere in there, which means you are one of the top 1.6 million or so earners in the US. Dropping down again, there were almost 3 million people overall that made at least $250,000, which would put you in the top 1.8% of all wage earners if you fall into that group. In terms of 200K or more, you've got about 4.5 million people that fall into that group from 200K all the way up to that 50 million plus. that still puts you in the top 2.8% of all wage earners. Now at $150,000 per year, that puts you right at about the 5% mark, and that means that there are around 8.5 million people that made at least $150K. Now, if you didn't make $150K, but you're wondering what it would take to squeak into the top 10% of all wage earners, the number is around $109,000 in a year, and that means that you would be one of the top 16 to 17 million people in terms of wages earned. There were over 19 million people that made at least $100,000 or more. If you were one of them, you would be in the top 11.8% of all wage earners. If you made $75,000, you are in the top 20% of all wage earners, which means you are in the top 32 million people or so. Now, over 58 million people made at least $50,000, which seems like an awful lot of people. However, if you made $50,000 or above, you are still in the top 35% of all wage earners. Which means that 65% of people that had any income reported had less than $50,000 in income. In fact, 20% of all of the people that had income reported had less than $10,000 in income. And I said earlier that the median was something over $34,000. And of course, the median being the middle means that is the 50% mark. So if you're under that 34 and change, then you were in the lower 50%. If you were over that mark, then you were in the upper 50%. Now, I just read a quote today that said comparison is the enemy of joy. So looking at your numbers versus other people, seeing many millions of people making more money than you might be a little disheartening, but perhaps you are surprised to see that you are actually higher than you would have thought when you actually look at the percentages of where you fall. In some cases, you might be worse than you imagined you were. I would love to hear your questions, comments, anything about these numbers in that comment section below. Otherwise, I thank you for watching. And as always, please go to proudmoney.com where we do credit card reviews, we talk personal finance, we talk deals, and all sorts of other fun stuff too. If you're not going to go to the website or you are not going to leave a comment, you know what you could do? Watch this video.